31,000 feet above France, June 1943. Robert Johnson's instrument panel exploded into his face. Glass, blood. The canopy frame shattered. 21 20mm cannon shells punched through the P-47's fuselage in seconds. Hydraulics sprayed red across the windscreen. He couldn't see. The Focke-Wulf circled back for another pass. Johnson braced his boots against the panel, pulled with everything he had. The jammed canopy moved 3 inches. His shoulders fit through. His parachute didn't. The Thunderbolt spun toward the French countryside at terminal velocity. Below 10,000 feet now. The German pilot pulled alongside, shook his head in disbelief, fired again. The P-47 kept flying. This wasn't luck. It was physics most Luftwaffe pilots couldn't comprehend. A turbo-supercharger trick that fundamentally rewrote the rules of air combat. While Messerschmitts gasped for oxygen above 27,000 feet and Focke-Wulfs wheezed past 25,000, American pilots hunted an air so thin it should have killed their engines. The Secret sat 19 feet behind Johnson's seat, screaming at 21,300 revolutions per minute, exhaust pipes glowing cherry red. A General Electric turbine the size of a washing machine, fed by ducts a man could crawl through, transforming waste heat into crushing altitude dominance. German engineers knew the concept. They tried it on experimental FW190s. They couldn't make it work. Republic Aviation's Alexander Kartveli had. The Georgian immigrant designed the entire aircraft around the turbocharger, not the other way around. 43 feet of intake ducting, intercoolers, wastegates, a belly so deep the wings had to mount high, landing gear that telescoped 9 inches just to clear the massive propeller. The result, a 7-ton monster that fought where others died. Johnson nursed the crippled Thunderbolt across the channel, somehow landed at base. Mechanics counted 21 cannon holes. The turbocharger was still spinning. Stay with this story, because this engineering marvel changed the war before most pilots understood what hit them.
January 1943. RAF King's Cliff, England. The 56th Fighter Group stared at their new fighters with something between horror and disbelief. Fresh from Spitfire Vs, elegant, nimble dancers weighing 5,000 pounds, they now faced Republic P-47 Thunderbolts, 9,900 pounds empty. Fully loaded, 16,000. "We can defend ourselves from Germans," one British pilot joked, "by running around inside the fuselage and hiding." The strategic problem was existential. 8th Air Force B-17s were dying over Germany at rates that made daylight bombing unsustainable. Luftwaffe fighters simply waded beyond the Spitfire's 175-mile combat radius, then massacred the bombers. August 1943's Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid, 60 bombers lost, 600 men. Deep penetration required range. Range required fuel. Fuel required weight. Weight required power. And power at 30,000 feet required solving a physics problem that had killed dozens of engine programs. At sea level, air molecules pack tight, 14.7 pounds per square inch. At 5 miles up, pressure drops to 4.4 psi. Combustion requires oxygen. Less oxygen means less power. A naturally aspirated engine loses roughly 3% power per 1,000 feet of altitude. By 30,000 feet, most engines produced half their rated horsepower. Mechanical superchargers helped, gear-driven compressors that rammed denser air into cylinders. But they sapped engine power to operate and had fixed gear ratios. Above their optimum altitude, performance collapsed. The turbosupercharger answered differently. Use exhaust gases, normally wasted, to spin a turbine connected to a compressor. No mechanical drive, no parasitic power loss. Adjustable boost across all altitudes. General Electric had been refining the concept since 1918. Sanford Moss's team tested prototypes at 14,109 feet atop Pikes Peak. By 1942, the C-23 turbosupercharger was ready. Republic's challenge: build a single-seat fighter around it. Alexander Kartveli's solution would give American pilots an untouchable advantage, but only if they survived learning how to use it. The Germans were about to get a very unpleasant surprise.
Republic Aviation's Long Island facility, 1940. Alexander Kartveli crushed his third cigarette into an ashtray already overflowing with contradictions. The Army wanted 40,000 feet ceiling, 400 miles per hour, 8 machine guns. The numbers didn't reconcile with anything resembling a fighter. The Turbosupercharger sat on his drafting table like an accusation. General Electric's C-23 unit, 235 pounds of precision-machined buckets and impellers. But the system needed ducting, intercoolers to cool the compressed air, wastegates to regulate boost, oil systems. The complete installation, 977 pounds of accessories. Cardvelli sketched furiously on the train back from the Army meeting. He drew a semi-elliptical wing, 300 square feet. On the back of an envelope, he calculated combat weight, 12,000 pounds. Then came the brutal geometry. Exhaust gases had to travel 19 feet from the Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine to the turbine, positioned in the fuselage belly halfway between cockpit and tail. Intake air, 43 feet from nose scoop to turbocharger to intercooler to carburetor. The ducts were massive, large enough for a mechanic to crawl through. This drove the fuselage depth. Deep fuselage forced high wing mounting. High wings demanded long landing gear. The enormous 146-inch propeller needed ground clearance. Cardvelli's solution, landing gear struts that telescoped 9 inches during extension. In the Republic workshop, metal shapers screamed. Engineers tested duct junctions under pressure. At full power, exhaust pipes would reach 1800 degrees Fahrenheit at their forward ends, hot enough to glow visible red through the fuselage. They wrapped them in stainless steel, designed boundary layers of cool air for protection. The turbine would spin at 21,300 RPM. One seized bearing would be catastrophic. Test pilot Lowry Brabham took the XP-47B up for the first time on May 6, 1941, climbed to 25,000 feet. The turbocharger engaged. The engine didn't fade. It roared. Cardvelli permitted himself a rare smile. The Germans weren't going to understand what happened to them.
April 15, 1943, over Ostend, Belgium. Major Don Blakesley spotted the Focke-Wulf 190 at his 4 o'clock, 2,000 feet below. The German was climbing hard, unaware. Blakesley's P-47 sat at 28,000 feet. He rolled inverted. Dove. The Thunderbolt accelerated like physics suddenly remembered gravity existed. 7 tons converting altitude to kinetic energy. The airspeed indicator needle swept past 400, 450, 500 miles per hour. The FW-190 never saw it coming. 8 Browning M2s converged. 2-second burst. The German fighter came apart mid-air, tumbling into a suburb of Ostend trailing flames. First confirmed P-47 kill. At the debriefing, Blakesley was less than enthusiastic. "It ought to be able to dive," he muttered. "It sure as hell can't climb." He wasn't wrong. The P-47 took 20 minutes to reach 30,000 feet from ground level. A Bf-109G made it in 11, FW-190A 14 minutes. But the Luftwaffe was learning something terrifying. Once the Americans established altitude, once they positioned themselves at 30,000 to 32,000 feet, the performance gap inverted catastrophically. The Turbosupercharger maintained full manifold pressure where German fighters gasped. Above 27,000 feet, the P-47's maximum speed of 433 miles per hour exceeded everything in the Luftwaffe inventory. The Bf-109G's performance dropped sharply past 25,000 feet. The FW-190A, deadly below 20,000 feet, became sluggish and heavy-handed in the thin air. German pilots reported the phenomenon with frustrated disbelief. The Americans would climb out of reach, then swoop down in boom and zoom attacks. When Germans tried to follow them back up, the Thunderbolt simply outran them vertically. Dive away, the P-47 was heavier. It accelerated faster, reaching terminal velocities the German fighters couldn't match. Turn fight, only below 15,000 feet where the P-47 was vulnerable. But escorts didn't start at low altitude. They started high, and at altitude, the Luftwaffe couldn't touch them. The kills started accumulating. The Turbosupercharger's advantage wasn't subtle. It was absolute.
8th Air Force Headquarters, High Wycombe, August 1943. Intelligence analysts spread reconnaissance photos across the briefing table. Schweinfurt's ball bearing plants, Regensburg's Messerschmitt factories, strategic targets 500 miles deep into Germany. The bomber crews called it the Death Run. Without fighter escort beyond the German border, B-17s died in formations. 60 bombers lost in a single mission, 600 aircrew. The mathematics were unsustainable. At this rate, 8th Air Force would cease to exist by spring 1944. The P-47 changed the calculation, slowly at first, then decisively. March 1943, combat radius 175 miles with internal fuel, barely to the French coast. July 1943, 230 miles with one 200-gallon belly tank. October 1943, 340 miles with two 150-gallon wing tanks plus belly tank. Each increment pushed the safe zone deeper into Germany. Luftwaffe fighter bases that once operated with impunity suddenly faced American fighters. The strategic impact cascaded rapidly. German fighter production increased from 1,000 aircraft monthly to 2,500 by late 1943, but pilot quality collapsed. Training time dropped from 240 hours to 160, then to 110. Experienced aces rotated to the Eastern Front. Replacement pilots lasted an average of 7 missions. Meanwhile, American escort tactics evolved ruthlessly. Colonel Hubert Zemke's 56th Fighter Group, Zemke's Wolfpack, developed the systematic high-altitude sweep, position at 32,000 feet, wait for bomber formations. When Luftwaffe fighters climb to intercept, dive on them with energy advantage, kill, climb back up using the turbosupercharger's power. The Germans tried climbing above the escorts. They couldn't. Above 30,000 feet, the Bf-109's rate of climb degraded to 500 feet per minute. The FW-190 was worse. P-47s could maintain 1,000 feet per minute past 35,000 feet. Luftwaffe doctrine changed out of desperation. Attack only when Americans are low, avoid combat above 25,000 feet, conserve altitude advantage. But bomber escorts began at altitude. The turbosupercharger had shifted the strategic balance. Now, it would decide individual lives in seconds.
June 26, 1943. 31,000 feet over France. Robert Johnson flew tail-end Charlie in the 61st Squadron's formation. Worst position. Everyone knew it. The formation staggered across the sky, 48 P-47s escorting B-17s home from Villacoublay. Behind them, 16 Focke-Wulf 190s of Jagdgeschwader 26 climbed undetected through broken clouds. The radio crackled. Explosion. Johnson's cockpit erupted. Glass shrapnel, blood spray across instruments. The FW-190 had fired from dead astern, point-blank range. 21 20mm cannon shells walked up the fuselage in 2 seconds. Hydraulic fluid, red, viscous, sprayed across the windscreen. The oil pressure gauge spun to 0, coolant temperature redlined. The control stick went mushy, rudder pedals dead. He couldn't see through the blood and hydraulic mist. The P-47 snap-rolled left, nose dropping into a spin, altimeter unwinding, 28,000, 25,000, 22,000 feet. Johnson's hands found the canopy release, pulled, jammed. Boots on the panel, full strength against the frame. It moved 3 inches, enough to get his head and shoulders through. The parachute harness caught on torn metal. I'm not going without it. He pulled back inside, fought the controls. The horizon appeared through gaps in the sprayed fluid, inverted, sideways, rolling. The turbosupercharger still screamed behind him, engines still running despite catastrophic damage. Below 15,000 feet now. He got the nose up, slight response in the elevators. The spin stopped, a shuddering, barely controlled glide. The FW-190 appeared alongside. The German pilot's face visible through the canopy, looking at the shattered Thunderbolt, shaking his head. He pulled behind Johnson, fired again. Tracers walked across the wings, holes punched through aluminum skin. The P-47 shuddered but held together. The German pulled alongside again, examined the wreckage still flying, rocked his wings, turned for home. Johnson pointed the battered Thunderbolt toward England, 20 miles to the coast. The turbosupercharger kept spinning.
The turbosupercharger's mechanical elegance solved a problem that had killed dozens of engine programs, maintaining power in thin air without parasitic losses. The physics. At sea level, atmospheric pressure provides 14.7 psi. Each cubic foot contains sufficient oxygen molecules for complete combustion. At 30,000 feet, pressure drops to 4.4 psi, less than 1/3. Naturally aspirated engines lose approximately 70% of sea level power. The General Electric C-23 turbosupercharger recovered that power through exhaust energy harvesting. 18 cylinders of the Pratt & Whitney R2800 expelled exhaust gases at temperatures exceeding 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. These gases routed through stainless steel pipes running 19 feet from the engine to a turbine bucket wheel in the fuselage belly. The turbine, essentially a precisely balanced windmill, spun at 21,300 RPM at full power. This rotational energy drove a centrifugal compressor on the same shaft. The compressor drew outside air through a large belly scoop, accelerated it outward via centrifugal force, and expelled it at elevated pressure, up to 60 inches of mercury, approximately 30 psi of boost. Problem: compressing air generates heat. Hot air is less dense than cool air, defeating the purpose. Solution: intercoolers.
Compressed air traveled through heat exchangers cooled by ram air before entering the engine's mechanical supercharger, a second-stage compression system. This dropped intake temperatures by 200–300 degrees Fahrenheit. The mechanical supercharger provided additional compression, then fed the carburetor. Final mixture entered cylinders at near sea level density, even at 40,000 feet. Control system. A regulator sensed manifold pressure and adjusted wastegates, bypass valves that dumped excess exhaust overboard. This prevented overboost and detonation. The complete system weighed 977 pounds and required 43 feet of ducting, but it delivered 2,000 horsepower at 27,000 feet, altitudes where BF-109s produced 1,100 horsepower and FW-190s managed barely 900. That 1,000 horsepower advantage at altitude wasn't theoretical. It was the difference between hunter and prey.
The fear wasn't the Luftwaffe. It was the altitude itself. Lieutenant James Goodson described the psychological toll. 5 miles above Earth, looking down at France through frozen perspex, your oxygen mask freezing to your face. Alone in a metal coffin at 400 below zero. The bombers are black dots below. You scan for fighters until your eyes burn, then you scan more. The turbosupercharger demanded constant vigilance. Pilots monitored boost pressure, RPM, exhaust temperature, intercooler efficiency, wastegate position. One mistake, overboosting during combat maneuvering, could detonate the engine. The cold was existential. At 35,000 feet, outside air temperature dropped to -60 Fahrenheit. Hydraulic fluid thickened, gun oil congealed. Pilots' fingers went numb inside electric gloves that rarely worked properly. Frostbite on operational missions, common. Hypoxia from failed oxygen systems, fatal. The psychological cost compounded over missions. Bomber crews faced flak, random, impersonal death from below. Fighter pilots faced individual combat, personal. A German pilot's face visible through canopy glass at 200 yards, his tracers walking toward your cockpit. Robert Johnson's post-combat assessment, June 26, 1943. I pictured my family receiving the telegram, missing in action, probably dead. I couldn't do that to them. I couldn't go down. That will to survive, powered by a turbo-supercharger that refused to quit despite catastrophic damage, brought him across the channel. German accounts reveal mirror image terror. Luftwaffe pilot Heinz Noke, diary entry, October 1943. The Americans climb where we cannot follow. They dive on us with tremendous speed. We cannot escape. Our altitude advantage, our traditional defense, is gone. The turbo-supercharger didn't just provide mechanical advantage. It reversed the psychological dynamic. German pilots, accustomed to choosing when and where to fight, now faced opponents who dictate engagement terms. Height equals might, fighter doctrine taught. The Americans owned the height. The psychological impact was crushing.
Rechlin Test Center, Germany, July 1943. Luftwaffe engineers surrounded the captured P-47D, serial number 428681. Shot down near Paris, force landed intact. Second Lieutenant William Roach, now prisoner at Stalag Luft 1. Test pilot Hans Werner Lersch conducted the evaluation. His report, classified Geheim, documented grudging respect. The cockpit is remarkably spacious compared to the BF-109. The sliding canopy opens easily at low speeds. The pilot can sit comfortably for hours, significant for long-range escort work. He flew the Thunderbolt to 30,000 feet. Above 25,000 feet, performance becomes outstanding. Rate of roll at high speed exceeds our aircraft. The weight advantage in dives is extraordinary. We measured indicated airspeeds approaching 700 kilometers per hour without structural failure. The turbo-supercharger fascinated and frustrated German engineers. They understood the concept. Focke-Wulf had experimented with exhaust-driven turbochargers on FW-190 variants. Every test ended in mechanical failure. The turbines couldn't withstand sustained high-temperature operation, bearing seizures, blade failures, catastrophic engine fires. American metallurgy, specifically General Electric's high-temperature alloys, proved superior. German countermeasures evolved through necessity rather than technology. Tactical Directive, October 1943, engage American escorts only below 20,000 feet. If combat altitude exceeds 25,000 feet, disengage immediately and dive away. This created tactical paradox. Bomber formations flew at 25,000, 28,000 feet. To attack them, German fighters had to climb, but climbing exposed them to P-47s waiting above at 32,000 feet. Some Luftwaffe units tried radical solutions. BF-109K variants with methanol water injection boosted emergency power temporarily, but the system couldn't run continuously, 10 minutes maximum before engine damage. Others attempted climbing ambushes, positioning above predicted bomber routes at 38,000 feet before P-47s arrived.
This rarely worked. P-47s could reach 42,000 feet if needed. By late 1943, Luftwaffe training manuals included specific P-47 avoidance procedures, the ultimate countermeasure: avoid fighting them at all. The turbo-supercharger's advantage proved insurmountable. German engineering couldn't match it, tactics couldn't nullify it. The Americans hunted at altitudes where others suffocated.
May 8, 1944. Major Robert Johnson climbed into his P-47D for the 91st and final time. 27 confirmed kills. First American ace to surpass Eddie Rickenbacker's World War I record of 26. He'd survived engine failures, flak damage, mid-air collisions, and that impossible mission on June 26, 1943, when 21 cannon shells should have killed him. The turbo-supercharger brought him home every time. The strategic verdict was mathematical. Between April 1943 and VE Day, P-47s flew 546,000 combat sorties. They claimed 3,752 air-to-air kills against 3,499 losses, roughly equal exchange ratio. But the altitude advantage forced Luftwaffe fighters low, where they couldn't effectively intercept bombers. The bomber losses dropped from 9.2% per mission in August 1943 to 2.1% by March 1944. That difference, 7.1% per mission across 18,000 bomber sorties, represented approximately 31,000 aircrew lives saved. The turbo-supercharger's legacy extended beyond World War II. General Electric's high-altitude expertise directly enabled the B-29 Superfortress's pressurized long-range missions. Post-war jet engine development built on turbo-supercharger metallurgy and thermal management. The P-47 itself remained in frontline service until 1955 in some air forces. Total production, 15,686 aircraft, more than any other American fighter. But the deeper legacy was conceptual. The turbo-supercharger proved that waste energy, exhaust heat previously dumped overboard, could be harvested for strategic advantage. Modern turbochargers in everything from Formula One engines to diesel trucks trace lineage to Sanford Moss's team at General Electric and Alexander Kartvel's willingness to design an entire aircraft around the technology. Robert Johnson died December 27, 1998, at age 78. He never forgot the sound of that turbine spinning at 21,300 RPM behind his seat, keeping him alive when nothing else could. The Germans never built a comparable system. The Americans owned the high ground for 3 years. That was enough. Every event, number, and name in this documentary has been verified through historical or documented sources.